second in a series of webinars this spring on business succession planning. My name is Chris Cooper. I work at the Ohio Employee Ownership Center at Kent State University here in Ohio. And today's session is a topic that I think fundamentally is something that is probably under dealt with, if that is a word, when business owners look for a succession. And the session today is on communicating your exit plan to your family. Oftentimes we see business owners not communicating what they're thinking is not always high on their list of skills and or things that they do well at. So we're really pleased to have this topic going today. And our speaker today is Randy Fairfax from Highland Consulting Associates in Northeast Ohio, based out of Cleveland. And Randy really is one of the experts in this area on this field. Really kind of focuses on how do you deal with this issue and create the communication necessary to have a successful succession plan. So without further ado, I am going to stop talking and turn it over to Randy.
Well, thanks, Chris, and I'm delighted to be here today. It's a topic that is dear to my heart, and I've seen the strengths and potentially the weaknesses when those plans aren't communicated. For the last 22, 3, 4, or 5 years, somewhere in there, I've had the privilege of working with largely small business owners, closely held business owners. Some of them you may not describe as small, and in that process, a lot of times strategically or technically you're talking about what is an exit plan or strategy, and that's a whole other discussion. Are you creating an exit plan, an estate plan, or a sales plan? But usually these things are done a lot of times for tax or technical reasons, and sometimes not thought through what impact that has to the family, or even as briefly we were talking off discussion here, is it a sustainable plan? And I found without communicating it and in an appropriate way, and it's not just me, we'll go over some statistics here in a minute that indicate it doesn't work well. I would encourage you, if you have questions or comments, I'm delighted to entertain them. Chris has mentioned a few ways you can ask. I think if you speak them up in our group, if that doesn't get crazy, I'm glad to just ask them as well. So if you have ones, ask as we go along. I'm glad to have a conversation about that. By the way, communicating your exit plan, I would suggest in a larger topic even of meetings, family meetings, usually dealing with family businesses. So the communication that we're going to talk about today is applicable in a much broader perspective. Most people say, well, first I have to come up with a plan to communicate it. My challenge there is you do have a plan. Today we're not going to discuss what that is, but most people either have a plan that they're expressing to people and they've never documented, so that's a challenge. Then when you tell people and it's not what's actually happening, others keep it to themselves. So in this topic, at least today, I'm going to try to cover, why this is important, what is the issue here, and then key issues involved, and then try to cover some meeting basics so you can kind of track where we're going with this. The first thing I guess I would share with you, and you may be familiar with some of these if you're in the realm of small businesses, but this is important to our economy. I would suggest to you, to your families, and your communities for many of these reasons. I mean, small businesses provide the jobs, provide employment, people earn wages and take care of their families, and they're the largest percentage of businesses in the U.S. Some large companies may have some greater employment, but small businesses are key. And if this doesn't work well in the future, that impacts all of those statistics that you've just seen there. In addition to that, 40% of these businesses will be passing in this next generation in the next 5 years. we'll see. That means there should be a lot of conversation about this topic going on now, is what that means to me. Typical family firms donate $50,000 per year to educational religious organizations. That's a great impact to the community related to values issues and those things they support. That if the business doesn't go on, it has a great impact. And then you see that what control and the amount of dollars that will be impacted there. Why is this important? These statistics tell you that it's not working. 70% of wealth that passes to the next generation is lost. You've probably heard those statistics before. 87% by the third generation. And I would suggest to you, and actually we'll show you in a moment, that's not just because they didn't have a plan. In fact, this idea of communication is a tremendous impact on that. You've seen this is directly related to businesses as opposed to just wealth, where 67 and 90, similar statistics. It's tremendously damaging if this isn't taken care of. Some of the reasons, at least, that I've found, a little chart that we've put together there, really the beginning phases, and today is not to discuss all the ramifications, but each one of these phases have an impact on the communication that occurs with your exit plan to whoever that would be. Your family, of course, is critical, but whoever you would be exiting to. When you start the business, here it's called a help phase, you're just struggling to survive. You start making a little profit in your hope phase, and then, which most businesses don't get to, by the way, and if you make it through that phase, then the profits start rolling in, you're a hero. It's then at that phase, in topping out, that many people get to, and that's where this next 5-year transition is. I don't take 5 years as a hard number. Those are the research. But that's where people then make a decision, what am I doing next? And most businesses, based on those statistics you saw earlier, 90%, 67% in the second generation, 90 by the third, end up moving toward liquidation, which isn't usually what the founders want to do. Some maintain, so they're not growing, but they're sustaining themselves, at least for that generation, and others decide, we're going to move this thing forward. In each one of those phases, there's communication that occurs, some out of necessity to work, others, once you've established that framework of work and who you communicate with, what secrets you keep and what secrets you tell and who you trust, even between husbands and wives and the roles they play, that impact what happens on this communication in the future. The secrecy issue is a huge challenge. One of those, and some of that involves the people you involve, how you relate to those. Sometimes those people that help you start out don't become totally competent in the future, and now when you go to communicate your exit plan or work with your kids or your management or whoever that might be, those become roadblocks that you need to be aware of. We have one example of a recent family that we've been working with, and they had a tremendous challenge in their business. And they brought in a friend of the family's who was good at carrying out the duties of Dad, the founder. And in that case, it was cutting costs. As those costs were cut, this person became a hero. It saved the business, and the business is skyrocketing today. That person was made the CFO. The challenge that they have in that communication today, as the goal is moving this to the children, is that CFO is a hero and holds all the secrets of this cut time. He's probably not, in fact, everybody agrees, not competent to be a CFO for the systems, and as they've grown, for the accounting processes to be put in place to properly do cost accounting and profit margin losses. But he has such a relationship with the owner that nobody can touch him. So it's both holding back the business and also holding back the communication with the kids. One of those challenges. What does this lead to? Which relates to the earlier slide related to a wealth study. And you've probably heard the saying, shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations. And the cycles, the statistics seem to show it. Now, Many break it, and our encouragement would be that all of you would break it. But what happens is wealth is created in that founding generation. We don't find it uncommon to find that second generation for many reasons, much of it related to communication, by the way, the first generation may say, we want them to be educated. We didn't get the chance to go to college, so they do. That second generation has had the benefit of some of that wealth, and they end up trying to preserve that wealth. In fact, we see that oftentimes that they may have jobs of accountants, maybe they're in the financial area, maybe they go into attorneys, occupations that in general are attempting to preserve that wealth, not creating it. Their children oftentimes having the benefit of that wealth, not living through that first generation, not that that's good or bad, but that third generation usually is the generation that then begins to consume the wealth. They've had a little different bent and a little different influence and a little different communication, and it's not uncommon to see them in musicians, in the theater, social work, opening up a unique boutique to exercise their talent, that oftentimes not bad occupations, but consume the wealth. And the cycle then continues. Are there ways, I guess, and with better communication to maybe accommodate all that without losing the wealth? My experience is that there are. A friend of mine who kind of pioneered consulting to owners many years ago in the 60s, Leon Danko, I think, said it a unique way. Most destroy on the way down what they built on the way up, which is exactly what we're having this to try to avoid. One of the things, so what are those statistics related to this loss of wealth? Roy Williams commented in his book, For Love and Money. If you haven't read it, I recommend a look at it. But most of this is not due to inadequate planning, which oftentimes is the main focus that you're told. About 10% from his surveys due to inadequate planning. 65% comes in this lack of trust and communication. And then the other huge part of that, which kind of goes hand in hand, is the preparation of heirs. So usually you're going to hear about the inadequate planning, and particularly in the political realm. Now I'm as much as anyone else, I'm for you retaining what you've worked for. But the estate tax is often the number one criminal of being able to continue your business and retain your wealth, not the exit plan, which involves an exit plan. In Cleveland, we heard that as the reason that the Browns were sold by Art Modell, or if you're in Miami, why Joe Robbie had to sell the Dolphins, and to some degree those are true. But it's not the reason in general, I would suggest. In Australia, as an example, and particularly a few years ago, they have about the same rate of business failures as we have, statistically, and they had no estate tax. And currently the estate tax limits are moving up, which is they're currently about $3.5 million. Between a husband and a spouse, they can protect up to $7 million, and likely those are going to rise. So those should have less impact on more families. It's very important, please hear me, to do the planning, but that's not the key focus. And my experience is, if it's focused upon at all, that is the key focus. So our encouragement today is you address these issues of communication, focused largely on the areas that we just talked about. Get my slide going, I apologize. This area of trust and communication and the preparation of heirs. What does that mean? What does that mean in family meetings? I would suggest it's critical, as the statistics I've just shown you, as the research says, to enhance the success of your plan. These meetings will also enhance your trust and communication and prepare your heirs. Covering 90% of the key focus, assuming the 10% you're going to have a lot of people coming at you on, to communicate that to your plan. Why do you do this? Well, one, you got to protect the value of your business, your estate value. What does that mean? If you don't have a plan, when you get to that leisure and liquidation standpoint that we looked at earlier, you may have key employees that start wondering, Mom, Dad, running this business, not sure what's going to happen, can't deal with the kids, or they don't know, and they have to make decisions on their next steps. If those folks leave or get enticed to move away from your business just because they lack the security of what's going to happen in the future, that is not generally beneficial to businesses as I've encountered. Those same issues occur, by the way, with your customers, your suppliers, your vendors. Often we hear of many businesses, they do a great job for you today, but what happens if Dad's no longer there? What happens if Mother that's running that is no longer there? It's critically important that they understand outside as well as in to protect the value of your business even today while you're there, is our experiences. Your family, it's critical to protect the unity of your family. What you do with your exit plan, how you do it, and how you communicate it can have a great impact on what happens to your kids both today and in the future and their kids. Most people that found and grew those things was to benefit themselves and their families as well as those things they have an interest in, those interests. And to know that they did this and their family never speaks to each other is not the goal that I've encountered that people want to have. Yet it happens too often for lack of this information. Usually within your family as well, even if they speak well, if your plan is not communicated, your exit strategies, if the financial value of that business is diminished, which happens, and then it gets sold at a discounted value, usually that's one of the largest, if not the largest asset in the estate. It's what you spent your time, it's been your stock market, it's what you've grown for the most part, because it's what you've controlled. To have your family get hit with that financial loss, particularly remaining spouses, oftentimes that are less active in the business, is a tremendous blow. Your business, we talked about a little bit earlier, related to its value, but what do you want that business to do and how do you want it to impact the community? Back to our legacy leisure or liquidation model earlier, is greatly impacted by how you communicate that. And most folks, at least that I've encountered, enjoy the ability to help families, their employees, those things in the community, even that we talked about earlier, that businesses support. And I would suggest to you, most communities have great benefit from that influence. Those people have generally started with some degree of work ethic, with a certain integrity, with values that benefit the community and get displayed. When that business is gone, if that exit plan is not executed, that impact to the community, to employees, to families, leaves as well. And unfortunately, I've seen too many of those end up in forced sales or forced liquidations because of lack of this communication of this plan. So if you're going to communicate, I think there's a few things that you need to think about. Everyone has a different perspective. I'm sure you've seen the picture. If you look at it from one vantage point quickly, it's an old woman. If you look at it a little deeper, in a different perspective, it's a young woman. So everyone can see the same picture and see a different picture within that picture. If you're involved in a business, I'm sure you know that there are differences in perspectives which impact your communication. Those perspectives differ from spouses. As an owner and going through those stages of the business, from building it from nothing to a hero, you've enjoyed the risk and been willing to take it. You put everything you had into it. Your spouse, if it's the wife that was with some children, they were probably looking for security, and they didn't exactly like that risk, but supported you in doing that. You view that business as creating a stable environment because you control the variables. They view that as being very unstable because they don't have a paycheck coming in that they see that some company's paying. We won't get into who's right or wrong here, but that would make you love the business. It may make a spouse hate the business. It may provide for you, and it may be viewed as draining your resources, including your time, and not just your financial resources, that way. And then when that comes to communicating a strategy on succession, you may view equal related to financial worth to your kids. May not always be fair. All your kids may not be involved in the business. They may not become competent to be involved in the business. But the spouse may say, no, all kids are fair is always equal. These are huge differences just between spouses that create big roadblocks to communicating your strategy. Because mom and dad can't agree, it's tough to then convey it to the kids with conviction. You got to be aware of those perspective differences, and I would suggest work on those, which can be done. There's the perspective of you to your children in the business, which, by the way, if the spouses object in perspective, the spouse running the business says, I may want the kids in the business. The other spouse say, I don't want the kids to go through anything that you did or communicate with their families like that. I don't want them in the business at all. Creates a challenge. A kid's perspective, again, depends on how they viewed the business. And now you may be approaching them to be engaged in the business. Well, if they came to the business and played on Saturday mornings while you worked there, they may view this as a place to have all fun. And your employees may view them that way, which also creates a challenge. If you talk about all the challenges with legal situations or employees or competitive situations, regulation, that may be nothing but trouble. That may be how they view the business, unlike you. If they had to work in the business to be identified with the family, at least in their perspective, I've never found an owner that intended that to be the case, but sometimes that was the only way the kids interpreted that. They would not be respected. They may say, is it worth it to do this for the future? It creates big challenges in this communication. Be aware of that. And even sibling to sibling, I find, is huge, which impacts the perspective that they give back to mom and dad. A family that I had, 3 children in the business, 2 sons and a daughter. And 2 of the kids, their stated goal all the time was, we need to sell the business. These are 48 to 44-year-old children, all very involved. The son-in-law of the daughter was involved in the business. The other child said, we need to keep the business. This has been in our family. We founded this. Dad founded this. Mom worked in it. I want this to be for our kids to be able to work in. Tremendous discord. Now, they got along well as a family. They ate all meals together on holidays, and they communicated. But with a strong conviction, 2 kids were saying, sell, sell. One saying, keep. Mom and dad, in their heart, loved the business, wanted it to stay in the family, but said, we've got 2 telling us sell it, and 1 telling us to keep it. Maybe that 1 is just obstinate. The interesting thing, try to cut to the chase here, actually none of the kids wanted to sell the business. But for over 6 years, in talking about what we're going to do and how we're going to succeed this business, that was the sole message that had come across. 2 to 3. The other unique thing is the written down plan for that business was that one of the children that had gone to college and had some formal education and worked in the business would primarily run it, and we trust that one. The other one is very good at sales, but gets quick decisions, makes them emotionally, and the other is just supportive. That situation existed because 2 of the siblings did not want to have conflict with the 3rd sibling, and they knew that if they all 3 were running this business, now that was the actual plan, not the proposed plan, which was to have the 1 son be more the manager. that they would be in conflict, that they did not want to be in conflict with their brother, so the only solution they saw was to sell the business. I would tell you, jumping ahead a bit to other parts of this, but that was a total communication issue on what is this exit plan. It was the perspective that the kids had between each other, and likewise with the parents, created a strong miscommunication to each other. And in my opinion, not that they would have been out on the street had they sold the business, but the family would not have been as unified as they are today, as they are now working through the transition issues of that business. So even sibling to sibling, the parents have their own challenges, but even sibling to sibling, somebody commented earlier, you have to try to figure out what is going on and what people are saying, and we're going to get into a little bit of how you do that, at least some thoughts that way. But they're big issues. You've got to understand these communication perspective differences. We found that the use of some tools, even ahead of the communication, is very beneficial. We've used a tool we call the Family Climate Survey. That tool we ask each member to fill out of the family, and that really goes over, kind of rate, how informed are members of the family, as an example. Is there a general freedom to express your opinion in the family? And as people, communication, is it straightforward or direct? So it doesn't ask for specifics, but at least we find that tool gives people the opportunity to say, I rate that high or I rate that low. And it provides a starter. You can create your own questions or your own tools, but we found that is a big help when it comes to actually getting together to communicate what this exit strategy is, to at least get you through those perspectives of where some people are coming from, to try to clear that away first. The other thing that, if you don't use a tool like that, there's always some preparation is the bottom line here, I would suggest, before outright sitting down and saying this is what's happening. And some of that is you may have kids that want to stay in the business. It's good to get a perspective from them on what do you think about the business. So I would suggest you have some questions, what's your track record for running this business, as an example. Have you managed people, guided any successful projects? How would you provide for the security, of your parents, if they gave up control and you were running this business? I think that helps them to start thinking, and at least through their answers gives you some input back to them. Now, I see a question, how was this resolved? And I'm not sure which situation that refers to.
I was going back, this is Mel, I was going back to the company that you were talking about with the two siblings that were sell and the one that wanted to keep, but they all actually wanted to keep the business. They just were concerned about the whether it be sibling rivalry or the miscommunication or just the problem of reporting to the son that wanted to keep, the general manager type. I was just curious how that was resolved.
That was resolved by laying out the facts. And what I mean by that is there was a meeting, a family meeting, to communicate this exit strategy. And there was a few other things that led up to that. Some I'll cover later, but I'll hit them now, and then that way we can skip through them later. Some of those issues were, the reality was, Mom and Dad said, if we do this, our kids will probably fight. If they all own this thing equally, our kids will probably fight. Two will probably gang up on one. And they will perhaps, we said, well, is that what you want? And will they still meet for Thanksgiving dinner? And Mom and Dad's answer was no. But yet that's what was happening. They drafted. In talking to each of the kids individually, they said the same thing. Same thing, said, this is what will happen. If that were to happen, we would probably, this brother is so strong that we would not want to buck him, and we would go with his way of thinking, and that may not be good for the business. So we don't want to get into that situation. Each kid individually shared the same thoughts. Of course, they share them in a different way. Well, the one brother that was strong said, I wouldn't sell for anything, and we can all work together, no problem. That's because they all went along with his way of thinking because they didn't want to buck him. The bottom line was, we said to the son, that Dad said, I want you to be you have the best basis, the best background, you make the best decisions. I want you to run it. We asked him, if it came down between a decision that you knew would benefit the business and be in the best interest of the business that you love, son that's now managing, asked him privately, and it came down, your brother wanted to make an exact opposite decision that you knew in his highest priority would hurt the business, which decision would you go with? Any idea what he said? Well, his answer was, I'll assume
hopefully it was what would be in the best interest of the business.
That was not what he said.
That doesn't surprise me.
He said, I would not want to we're family. I don't ever want to lose the relationship with my brother. I would go with my brother even if I knew it would hurt the business. So we said, well, we need to convey that to your parents. He said, no, that's fine. They need to know that. So we did. And ultimately, we sat down and we came up with a strategy, and that's why planning is important, to actually allow a different structure, and we don't need to go into that today. But we said, okay, you know the facts now, Mom and Dad, so you know it won't work, and you've admitted for all three of them to get it equally. You know that it could really damage the business if you do what you're proposing. So let's structure a way that you can accomplish perhaps both of those and your family can stay unified. We did that in a short answer through the use of some voting trust ideas. And we said, well, now we got to tell this to the family. And parents said, we don't want to do that. We don't think that'll go very well. We don't think they'll like this idea. We said, well, if that's what you're doing, you don't want them to find out when you die. So we need to sit and talk and let them hear it. Word of this got out. A little agenda went out. Family meetings called. And as you may imagine, in this situation, there were 3 breakfasts scheduled with Dad and Mom. Each one trying to figure out what's going on, what's happening. Again, lack of communication and this issue of trust. And the bottom line was, it made Mom and Dad even more nervous about the meeting. The meeting was held. To answer your question, issues came up, and said, hey, brother that's strong, would you work for a brother would be, if he were chosen to run this business, would you work for him? The answer was no. I'd never listen to him, but I'd work with him. We asked the question, brother that's picked to do this, son-in-law is part of it, but the daughter, so the daughter was less active. The bottom line was they all agreed, where it started out as a terrible idea, by the end of the meeting, every one of the kids and spouses agreed that the structure that it set up would be very workable, and ultimately that it would be in their interest to have a manager come in that they would all agree upon and hire as more of a CEO, and then they would do their individual talents. So perhaps that was too long of an answer to yours. I apologize, but that's how that situation was resolved, and they continue to work on it today.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, understanding individuals, everybody has an interest. One family we worked with, a tremendously successful family, a son, by virtue of being the only one that wanted to be active in the business, was running the business. The challenge was that a daughter They owned a lot of real estate, and a daughter had grown up in significant wealth in that family and decided that wealth was a bad thing, that the environment was a good thing, and that helping the poor was her life mission. Those are admirable goals. But what they did to the business was every time brother wanted to do something, she would block it because she felt he just had a greed motive to make profit, and she had a more noble outlook to help the poor, and so that they shouldn't sell any real estate, they shouldn't develop any real estate, and she had to sign off. Even though she was a minority, she still had a piece, and you can't sell partial interest to do development work. So Mom and Dad, while they perhaps structured the exit strategy, their lack of communication on why they did the business and what they did to the business and how this would look in the future created a tremendous, tremendous conflict between brother and sister here because they had very different personal agendas. So understanding your kids, some communication between those kids with sister and brother and finding out why they were fighting and why they couldn't agree and why he couldn't even talk to her and she wouldn't even show up at meetings, and saying, sister, can we accomplish this if we do this with the business, if we set aside certain profits and dollars and do things over here to help some of the causes that you have, even if your ownership interest in her case ends up going to a trust that you can then move away. Helping them come together, once understanding them, was huge. One of the big issues in this communication we find is that oftentimes there's only one right answer that's viewed. And this is the way it has to be, and that's the way that person thinks. And therefore, whoever has that view, that's the way everything's going to be. Whether, again, that's between siblings or spouses or parents and kids, our strongest encouragement is there's more than one way to approach and get around this, and it doesn't mean the other person is totally wrong. There are areas in life that I do believe there's truth that is a standard, but in those areas that there's only one way to redirect or help a family or succeed this business or exit it, I have not found that to be a truth that only exists with one answer. So understanding individuals is key. And then building up trust is huge. The communication isn't going to work if there's no trust built up. That's the onus of you in communicating your exit plan, carrying it through. This little cartoon, someday, son, this will all be yours, assuming I can get my father to give it to me. The plans, the conversations, they go on. And now even into the third generation, when the second generation still isn't sure what's going to happen, that doesn't help build up trust. 3 keys I would suggest to you as you communicate this exit plan to communicate it, but the way to build up trust. One is sincerity, both with who you're delivering it to and in yourself. And what I mean by that is somebody, if they're consciously or deliberately insincere, it doesn't matter what your plan is or how you communicate it, it won't work. I don't find that to usually be the case. I find oftentimes their activities, they may not show up for meetings, they may not show interest, they may be very laissez-faire when you communicate with them. I've often found that not to be that they sincerely don't care. Sometimes it's their communication over some subject matter they haven't even brought up. But a lot of times they get in bad habits and don't even realize what that is doing. And what I mean by that is if you approach that person, you're not sharing in your work, so I don't trust you. That person in hearing that oftentimes, needs to know what's behind that. Well, behind it is you never show up, you never show an interest, you never do what you're supposed to do. And I've seen that help people to kind of shake them out of their bad habits sometimes, again, taking some steps through that communication to actually set some goals and benchmarks for them so they themselves can see that they're not meeting up to standards or whatever they help create. If a person's not competent and you've got them involved in your exit strategy, it will not lend to increasing trust. And now there are multiple areas of trust. I mean, you can trust them to be honest. You can trust them to be a good person. If they're 16, you may be able to trust them to drive, but you're probably not going to ask them to do surgery on you because they're not competent to do that. And that's one area of trust that you have to engage them in an area of competency, understand what that is, but also not let that dictate that they are not trustworthy or that you don't trust them in other areas of life. Back to a little earlier, we talked about that family business, but if they're not engaged in the business, that means you don't trust them. That message too often is heard from kids. That's not what it's saying. You encourage them in the areas they are competent. Reliability, this is a strong one that is very tough from the start of that business when there was no time left in your day to growing into a hero that we talked about earlier. Many owners are the most ethical and most reliable people at work. But when it comes to their family has a perception or that trust has broken down. Why might that happen? I'm sure you were just asking that on the tip of your tongues. But at work, you exercise the greatest business ethics. You wouldn't cheat anybody, you wouldn't cheat your employees, and you treat them with respect. But when you've told your daughter or son that you'll be there for their 8th birthday party or 12th or 13th or the graduation, an issue comes up that you need to meet payroll, and that is very important. You meet the payroll and you miss the party. It happens. But those things go to breaking down your reliability with those people that you are now going to be communicating an exit strategy with. If you were supposed to pick something up for a party or a celebration or an event, and you had to cancel at the last minute because of a business situation, these happen. But be aware that that can impact your reliability because your kids may say, well, if somebody called him for a business meeting, he wouldn't have canceled that business meeting. He would have been there. He would have been prepared. He would have had what he needed to bring. You tell your kids to respect their mom, and you talk to your kids about all the faults of mom. Those are issues, as I've talked to families, and those are actual situations that I've heard, that break down this reliability factor, and now you're going to be talking to them about what's going to happen in this exit strategy, and it involves them. You've got to work at, once you take those steps, building or rebuilding that trust if it's been broken. My hope is for you that it hasn't. And if they're not competent and they're not reliable, your kids included, by the way, it works both ways. Don't continue to give them responsibility hoping that they will be. That doesn't build your trust in others that you're going to share with either. As you know, trust is you give it and you receive based on merit, and it can be lost quickly. In the same vein, I would also say it's not a static situation. Wherever you are at a high level of trust or a low level of trust today, that can change for the good or for the bad. So there's great hope, and unfortunately I talk to too many that have given up hope. I've either made enough bad decisions or my kids have made enough bad decisions that we're just not even going to address this anymore. They don't feel that way inside, but that's the resolve that there's just nothing more we can do. In all honesty, I've not found that to be the case. But again, you do have to take some of these steps to build trust and some of those things we talked about related to communication, particularly when you're talking about this very important issue of this exit strategy. That's how your communication is going to be heard more, the greater the trust that you build. What does that mean? How do you do that? Listening, which is key, not just to what is said, but what is said behind that. We talked a little bit about earlier about, talking about not giving your fair share and I don't trust you. What's really said is, I want you to start showing up and doing things. So listening, with that third ear, what are they really saying behind that? They don't. In the case, do they really want to sell the business? Does that mean they just want to get rich and use the money, or they don't want to work? That family's case, not at all. Now, by the way, that was the perception of the parents originally. It was the farthest thing from the truth. All the kids enjoyed the business, loved the employees, loved taking care of the community. They just didn't know how to resolve this issue among themselves. So it's very key when you get feedback that you hear that and listen to it. Open atmosphere is very important, which to me that means you have to get the taboo subjects. There can't be any. There can't be any that you can't talk about. And that becomes very challenging because sometimes your kids, or at least I've encountered it, they want to talk about Dad's affair of 10 years ago. They want to talk about other issues. I'm not going to work for my brother. I'm not going to work for my sister. If she's going to be the president, we're not going to do that. These are subjects that you can't have taboo subjects. You've got to create an environment where it isn't going to alienate somebody. It also needs to be safe and not, we'll talk about later, not attacking. But those subjects will divide your wealth. Actually, division of wealth and control are usually the two main taboo subjects. Because if we talk about it, somebody's going to think we're trying to get something early or get more than we want. And if you talk about control, they're going to think we want all the control. And maybe we do. So you have to create an environment to do that. And the more information you give, the greater the trust that you build. Thinking about maybe someday or when, that is a challenge for people. So the more information you give about your business, about your profitability, and I don't suggest the first meeting, but the more information you give, the more trust you start building with your family. A few meeting basics. One, it should be formal. The formality creates an importance. Actually, intended another slide here that didn't get it in. You should have an agenda that people can look at ahead of time so they can be thinking about these things. A lot of people are afraid of that because they're afraid they're going to have these private meetings with kids, and sometimes you do, or that they get their ammunition up against you. And an outside presence to your meetings, sometimes that's a CFO, CEOs, other times it's a facilitator. That's a role that we play oftentimes. Helps with the seriousness of the meeting so it doesn't get on too many tangents. Some of those basics of actually holding that meeting, I would suggest need to know the purpose. This is not to make day-to-day decisions when you're communicating what you're going to do with your exit strategy or any topic for your family business. You need to deal with the important, big issues with the strong, feeling type of it, not the daily decisions. Too often it gets easier to talk about a daily decision or a personnel issue because that's away from your family and away from this big issue. Seek to gain understanding of everybody there. A key point, I alluded to it earlier, should have had a bullet point here, no personal attacks. You can attack issues, issues of control or issues of wealth division, but you can't allow personal attacks on people. We step in the middle there as a facilitator and say, you pointed at me, but also by using phrases like, I feel, or this is what that made me feel like. You didn't trust me, or those are easier statements than you don't trust me or you're not trustworthy. There are no poor questions. That facilitates an open atmosphere. Agree upon the goals of the meeting. What are you trying to accomplish at this meeting? Understanding an exit plan. Not accepting it necessarily at that meeting, not confirming it, but we're trying to understand what this exit plan is and what the thinking behind it is. Those should be observable and measurable. Always, I would suggest, summarize that meeting so everybody there is clear that we met the goals, that we have a common perspective to take our next steps on, which will come out of that, action steps, and then setting that next meeting to continue to build this trust and communication and further that process. That's your first steps. I think, of course, you have to have a plan. By the way, you have one today. So even if you convey that plan and discuss it, it's your default plan. But I would suggest and decide what your plan is. You have good reasons for it, and then set a time to get together, some of these key items and meeting basics, communicate that, knowing that you need to be building up trust whenever you say something there. There's a number of ways that you can continue to build trust by just following through on things that you say. And be careful what you say. You don't want to put yourself in too much of a box there, but you want to be honest and communicate that. And it's huge. I talked about preserving those values of the family and the business. Anytime you're going to be providing a discussion for your family, you're going to be building that wealth, reversing those statistics, because if a family is unified, they're higher percentage. You're going to get these taboo subjects on the table. You'll all be learning to more effectively communicate and build trust. The family's going to learn. They're going to be better educated. Your spouse is going to learn and know more about this business. Everyone benefits from this communication and trust as you describe what you're doing or what you want to do, and it helps you to refine the situation, even as I told you with the family earlier. They refined a better plan together that they all agreed on, and then they work on. And all family members would have a role in the family. It's invaluable for our communities, for your family, for you. Love to talk a ton more about it. Glad to tell stories or whatever. But this Chinese proverb I run into often: if we do not change our direction, we're likely to end up where we are headed. And too often that happens in this area of exit planning and communication. Thanks for your attention. I'm delighted to talk at greater length if you'd like to, but I think our time is about done.
Thanks, Randy. This is Chris again. I just want to open up the floor. Excuse me. See if there's any questions from folks out there. Any comments? I have a couple comments. One of the things I thought was striking was when Mel asked about what was the solution, what was resolved, that one of the issues they came up with was to hire an outside manager, so to speak. And I think when you're dealing with family businesses, a lot of times they don't think it doesn't occur to them necessarily that might be a viable option. You know, maybe the kids, you know, maybe the manager isn't from the family. And maybe the best solution to achieve family harmony is, in some sense, to take the family out of the equation. Let them do what they're skilled at, but find an outside manager. I don't know, Randy, do you find that happen a lot in your experience?
Well, in that case, those kids had a skill set but didn't know how to work together with each other.
Right.
And this person, which Dad was opposed to because he knew they had the skill, but this person provided a buffer zone for them to work with each other, and in that case decided to come on for a time period, 5 years, and it has worked out very well. It has opened up the communication, facilitated a very strong administrative person, and it's allowed the kids to define their own roles within the business and work together. It's in year 2 now, so it is working very well. Father agrees now, while he was opposed to it then. So there are, some may be long-term, some may be short-term, but oftentimes there are other solutions than just throwing the kids into the mix. And it's helped them with some administrative tools. They didn't have some of the cost structuring and system process background. And so this person has helped bring some of that to the being. So, yeah, not every situation is the same, but certainly it's an option, and particularly when you come to it jointly. Right, right.
And I think that's another key word, jointly, when you're dealing with these types of things. I wanted to ask real quickly one more time, is there any other questions, comments out there? I want to encourage folks, I put up the slide with Randy's contact information. I know in a lot of cases sometimes people don't like to talk about these topics online, being recorded, so to speak. So I want to encourage you that if you want to talk to Randy afterwards, I'm sure he'd be more than happy to talk with you. If you got some issues you want to work through, here's the phone number and the email for you to get a hold of Randy. I want to thank Randy for the excellent presentation today. It's as I mentioned at the beginning, it's I think a topic that deserves serious scrutiny by all business owners as they go through this process.